So what is basically pressure? Pressure is defined as a force acting on a unit area. So it is basically a force that is basically acting on a unit area. So first of all, we are going to discuss about the pressure for solids. So there is a formula that is basically used to define pressure, and that is force per unit area. Remember, force is always calculated in Newton, while area is calculated in meter square. So the formula here that the unit for the pressure that comes out to be Newton per meter square, or we can take this meter square upside and that would convert Newton per meter square. Okay, and it can also be represented in the form of Pascal. Okay, so these are important things that we must need to consider. Oh, sorry. Okay, okay, so these are the things that we must need to consider. So the important thing here is its unit that can be either Newton per meter square or Pascal. Okay. So now I just want to describe you some important thing that according to this formula, that is pressure per unit area. So lower the pressure, lower the lower the area, greater will be the pressure. Greater will be the pressure. How can we say that? Because we know that here pressure and area, they are basically inversely proportional. So lower the area, greater will be the pressure. So this is very important observation that lower the area, greater will be the pressure exerted. Greater will be the pressure. Pressure. Okay, so this is very important observation. And we know that pressure and force, they are directly proportional to each other because they are on the same way. So they are directly proportional. So that means greater the force, greater will be the pressure. Greater will be the pressure. So these are very important observation that we must need to uh, keep in consideration because that can be asked in exams as well. Okay, so let's move further regarding them. Okay, we know that knives, let's take some daily life examples. Let's take some daily life examples. Okay, we know that if there are two knives, there are two knives. One is sharper and other is not much sharp. So Which knife would exert more pressure? Definitely, sharper knife would exert more pressure, would exert more pressure. Why? The reason behind is that because of small area, because of small area that is in contact with a thing that needs to be cut, that needs to be cut. So, a sharper knife is exerting more pressure. The reason is quite simple because of its smaller area that is in contact with the thing that needs to be cut. So, smaller area would exert more pressure. Now, we have another example like if there are two women, okay, who are basically who are walking on snow. One is wearing, uh, you can say joggers. This is basically joggers. Okay. Joggers are basically flat from the bottom, and the other one is basically wearing this kind of a heel. Okay. This kind of a heel. Not like this. You can say this kind of heel. Okay. So this is the basically the picture. So which is exerting more pressure? So this one would exert, this heel would exert more pressure. And the reason is quite simple that because of its smaller area in contact with the snow. So smaller area would exert more pressure. Okay. So it would exert more pressure because of smaller area in contact with surface. Contact with surface. Okay. So let's move further towards the next topic, and that is basically pressure in liquids. So pressure in liquids that basically depends upon three things. And pressure in liquid, the formula is rho g h, where rho is basically the density of the liquid, while g is acceleration due to gravity, due to gravity. And h is basically the depth of the liquid. So what we have learned in pressure in liquid is that, for example, this is basically the surface of sea. This is surface of sea. And there are basically 3 points. This is A, this is B, and this is C. So which point would exert more maximum pressure? Which point exert maximum pressure? So this is basically the question. So point C answer is that point C exerts maximum pressure because it has, because, sorry, because, let me just, okay. So the reason behind is that because it has maximum depth, maximum depth. Okay. So that is why point C is exerting maximum pressure. And we know that there's a question why the wall of dam, we know dam is basically used to, you can say, store water. So the why the wall of dam is thick from bottom, from bottom. So the wall of dam is basically thick from the bottom, and the reason is of greater pressure. So the answer is the wall of dam is thick from bottom because of greater depth. So we know that pressure in liquids that basically depends on depth, as we have seen in this formula, that pressure basically depends on depth and it is basically directly proportional as well. So that is why it is exerting the maximum pressure, and that is why the wall of the dam has to be thick from the bottom. Now, there are basically different instruments which are used to measure pressure. Okay, so pressure measurement, we are using basically different type of uh, instruments. The one is basically manometer, which is used to find the difference in pressure between two gases or liquids. Or the other thing that we are going to discuss is barometer, that is basically used to measure the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so this is basically used to measure difference in pressure between two liquids or gases, and barometer is basically used to measure the atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure is the basically the pressure exerted by the atmosphere. Okay, so these are basically its uses. Okay, so barometer is basically used to measure the atmospheric pressure. Now let's move further.
Okay.
Let's discuss about the working of manometer. Manometer is basically a U-shaped tube. Okay, so it's basically a U-shaped tube. Like for example, there are basically two containers like this, and there is basically an opening from here that is basically connected with a U-shaped manometer, which contains mercury inside it. Okay. So what happens? They are both basically opened. So atmospheric pressure exerts on them, pressure that is present in them. Here it also contains the atmospheric pressure. When they both are opened, okay, so like for example, when it is open and this is also open, so what happens? The level of mercury will not change, it would remain same. It would remain same as both contains the same pressure like this. So the level of mercury would remain same. Level of mercury in manometer would remain same. Okay, as we have connected both of them. So now, when, for example, in the second condition, there is a gas on left hand side of a container which is having higher pressure. This is having higher pressure. It is basically connected with a U-shaped manometer once again, like this. Okay. So this is basically the area of lower pressure and it contains the higher pressure. Because of higher pressure, what happens? Mercury here would move downward. So it comes here and this level goes up. Because high pressure is exerting force here on mercury. Okay, so higher pressure would exert more pressure on mercury. So what happens? That level of mercury that would goes downward. This is basically mercury present in it, and we can even highlight it as well. Okay, okay, that's fine. Okay, so what happens? This higher pressure would exerting the force here, and so the level of mercury has been changed. So that this difference in pressure, basically, you can say up till this place because there's a difference in height, like it's here and it's here. So this difference in pressure, that basically difference in height of mercury, that basically tells us the difference in pressure in both containers. Difference in pressure in both container, because we know that this container is at higher pressure, is exerting more pressure downwards on mercury. So this would move upward. Okay, this would move upward. So this difference in pressure that basically records the difference in pressure in both container. So let's move further and towards the next operators, and that would be barometer. So first of all, barometer is an instrument that can be used to measure atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure is the pressure exerted by the atmosphere. So pressure exerted by the atmosphere. How it works actually. Okay. So it basically consists of a glass tube which should be at least 80 centimeter in length. So this is basically a glass tube and that must need to be 80 centimeter in length. And this tube is filled with mercury and then carefully inverted into a trough containing mercury. So this is basically a trough and that contains mercury. Okay. So this is basically a trough that contains mercury. Okay. So this is basically a glass tube which should be of at least 80 centimeter in length and it is to be filled with mercury. And what happens when it is inverted into the trough that also contains mercury? So what happens that there is a region which is formed which is vacuum here. With vacuum means that it contains no air, contains no air. Okay, so now what happens that once it has been inverted into a trough, this level drops and the length, and you can see that here basically atmospheric pressure is exerted at these places. So atmospheric pressure is basically exerted at these places. So actually what happens when atmospheric pressure is has been exerted in these places, so what happens, the level of mercury here tends to rise up. So the length here from here till this point, that this length basically tells us that about the atmospheric pressure, the pressure that has been exerted by the atmosphere. And what happens if you can say atmospheric pressure is greater, then more mercury would enter and it would tends to rise up. And what happens because of that? So greater the atmospheric pressure, greater will be the length. Okay. So greater the atmospheric pressure, so greater would be the length, would be the length. Okay. So this is what we can analyze through this diagram. Okay. So I hope it's clear to you. And there is one more important thing that we are using barometer in we are using mercury in barometer because if water is to be used, if water is to be used in place of mercury, then what happens? We have to use this, we have to use the taller tube. Why? Because mercury is more denser than water. Water is to be used in place of mercury, then we have to use taller tube. Okay. So this is very important information that can be asked in the exam, that what would happen that if we use like water in place of mercury. So this is whole about the lecture of pressure.